Over the years, I have done a variety of different versions of this presentation. I've called it The Future of Learning. I've called it 14 Years of Kindergarten. We're back to the future of learning. And then it's actually going to be done in 3 segments here with pauses for some questions for you to look at. And that allows you to look at 3 different videos instead of one long video here. So I think it's helpful to become aware of the general conversation about education in the world. And so I have a long list of book titles here that I hope you'll explore. And in particular, Bill Daggett's work around rigor, relevance, and relationships, Angela Duckworth's work on grit, Medina's work on brain rules, all of these things. Even Susan Cain's work on introverts, the value of being quiet. There's also some really great literature by Tony Wagner and Ted Dintersmith on Most Likely to Succeed. They made a video, a movie about that as well. So there's a number of different resources I hope that you'll seek out. TED Talks, TeacherTube, all these different kinds of things are great resources that can be used in advance of having a deep dive into the future of learning in your community. So the world's changing quickly, and the skills that young people need are very different than when I was in junior high and high school more than 40 years ago. And in general, that comes down to creativity, communication, collaboration, and critical thinking. The 4 C's, we'll touch on that again later. But that's kind of the why it's so important to think about the future of learning. A key observation that I have about why this is also important is captured in these graphs, which are just looking at a number of different trends of the great spike in population, mostly in the last 100 years of the last 1,000. Similarly, the global temperatures, energy consumption, water consumption, technology adoption, etc. But what's also interesting is that there's actually been a decline in world wealth and about treading water in terms of access to education. And I think a lot of the conflict around the world is because of all these other factors are spiking, but wealth is becoming more dissipated and access to education is similarly kind of dissipated. And that's, again, a source of tremendous conflict. You all have probably seen variations on this image of just kind of the amount of technology that is coming our way, whether it's things like Netflix and YouTube and tweeting and Facebook and all the rest. But that's kind of the context that we're in 60 seconds, all this information kind of blasting our way. There's an economic element here too, and I'm just going to use an example from the US with some examples in the state of Montana to further illustrate that. But if we take 100 kids entering grade 9, about 80 of them graduate 4 years later. About half of them go to college, about half of them complete college. And I think that that's a fundamental challenge that we have in the world today, is that so few people benefit from completing high school, completing a degree in college. And the example I have is from 2016. This is updated periodically in the United States in terms of what that means in terms of unemployment and weekly income. So if you don't finish high school, you're unemployed an awful lot, and when you are employed, you don't earn very much. Completing high school, things improve. Similarly, completing college, etc. Things get tremendously better at every step until you get a PhD, and then there's a slight backslide of income, and it's mostly that you're part of such the rarefied air of having a PhD that you put yourself in a pretty small box in terms of work opportunities. So a slight decrease in wages and increase in unemployment. So changes all the time, but I think it's an important thing. And again, I think it speaks to the challenges that we often have of thinking differently about the world of education in our communities is that if so few people have benefited from an education economically, that also ripples through so many other things, health, and rates of incarceration and many other challenges that our communities are faced with. Another observation is that when we think of the work opportunities that young people have, they're very different than they were even 10 years ago. And we think of organizations like Uber and Airbnb and a few others that don't own the resources that they're using on a daily basis. They're just harnessing the energy of others to meet their needs. And that takes a different set of skill sets to thrive in that kind of work opportunity compared to a traditional show up at a bricks and mortar location. There was an interesting study asking how robot-proof various people's jobs are, and this chart that I have shows at the bottom the jobs that are not likely to be replaced by a robot because of either a need for very much hands-on work, such as cutting your hair or cutting the lawn, or running a major organization. And then as you move to the left in the diagram and towards the top, the big red box are the jobs that are quite likely to be replaced by algorithms and robots, et cetera. And I think a key piece of that is that we all tend to think of ourselves as not being in that realm. And yet even educators are being replaced by robots and algorithms, designers similarly. There's lots of different roles that we're thinking differently about the nature of those jobs in the future. And in the US, there's been a lot of debate about jobs being exported to other countries. The reality is that many of these jobs, we're doing them ourselves. Every time we go online and we're our own travel agent, our own banker, our own realtor, et cetera, our own lawyer even, all of those things are factoring into where the jobs are going. If we look at some other studies that have been done and thinking about questions of what are the skills that young people need to thrive in the world beyond school, you see that the top focus that has very little relevance to the world of work are the things that we do all the time. We focus on humanities and history and language and science, but what employers are looking for are critical thinking and communication, collaboration, work ethic, things like that. Inevitably, every school is concerned about safety, and there's many different important insights about this, but I'd like to provide some simple context, which is that when we think of safety in the world today, we're always talking about active shooters, and yet the things that are happening in and around our schools all the time are simple things like the speed limit is too high, and young people are being hit by cars passing through the neighborhood. And so let's focus on those simple things that happen all the time, kids falling on the playgrounds, bullying, et cetera, and we'll be prepared for the very infrequent issues of school safety. I have a whole other section on school safety I'll do another day, but there's much concern about that around the world. So here's our first pause and an opportunity for you to look at a few essential questions, including how do we prepare our learners for coworkers who will be algorithms and robots.